This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
Good evening. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Hamden, North Haven, I want to welcome you to the 34th District State Senate debate. My name is Sally Buemi. I've been a member of the League of Women Voters for 10 years, and I will be the moderator for tonight's debate. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization with a long history of sponsoring debates at all levels of government. The League is dedicated to fairness and an equal footing for all debate participants. No one but the League of Women Voters Questions Committee knows the questions that will be asked. Each candidate will be allowed the same time to speak without interruption. First, I would like to introduce the three candidates. The order they are seated was determined by random drawing a few minutes ago. Candidate number one is the Green Party endorsed candidate, David Bedell. In the middle, at number two spot, is the incumbent Republican candidate, Paul Ciccarella. And third, we have the Democratic endorsed candidate, Brandy Mendato. The debate will consist of 6 questions. Prior to the questions, there will be a 2-minute opening statement. After the opening statement, the debate will consist of 6 questions. The questions were determined by the Questions Committee of the Hamden North Haven League of Women Voters. Questions were also submitted via email from the public and considered by the Questions Committee. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to respond to each question. Scott Howland, our timer, will make sure that it's 2 minutes. The card holder, Nancy Barrett, will give a 30-second warning. At the end of 2 minutes, the card holder will give a stop sign and you will hear a bell. Okay. The candidate may finish their sentence. After that, I will move on to the next candidate. After the 2-minute responses are complete, each candidate in the same order will have a 1-minute rebuttal, and again with a 30-second warning and then a stop sign. After the completion of all 6 questions, each candidate will be given a 2-minute closing statement. And finally, each candidate will be given a 1-minute statement of interests. No policy or politics are allowed during the statement of interests. The purpose of this final statement is to afford each candidate the opportunity to tell the voters what they like to do in their spare time away from work and politics. During this debate, I must ask the audience members here in attendance to please refrain from any clapping, booing, heckling, or any sounds or behavior that will interfere with the program. Anyone who disrupts this debate in any fashion will be told to leave the building. Tonight's program will conclude with some brief remarks from the moderator about the League of Women Voters of Hamden North Haven and how you can get involved. I ask that the audience remain seated during these closing remarks. So let's get started. Each candidate will have a 2-minute opening statement. Candidate Bedell, your 2-minute opening statement.
Thank you. Hi, my name is David Bedell. I grew up in the Clintonville section of North Haven and graduated from North Haven High School. But I started my education at the old Memorial Library, which is now the Historical Society, and then spent many hours in this library, back when it was only 2 stories. I think it's a little bigger now. But I got my bachelor's degree at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania and a master's degree at the University of Alabama. And since then, I have been an English teacher most of my life. I've lived in several parts of Connecticut, several different states in the U.S., and I also spent time in France and in China getting some international perspective. So now I currently teach English to international students at Sacred Heart University. I also previously spent several years in public health nonprofit management. But I am still teaching, and I get exposed to viewpoints from all over the world. I have students from the Middle East, from South America, from Asia, and it's always exciting to hear how people live and how things operate in other countries. So I could say I have an international perspective to problem solving. Thank you.
Okay. We will now hear a 2-minute opening statement from candidate Ciccarella.
Thank you, and good evening. And I'd like to thank the Women League of Voters for putting on tonight's debate, and also you for all of your hard work. I could see you put a lot of time into this. I'd also like to thank everyone that's here and those of you watching from home. Especially like to thank all the constituents who put their confidence in me over the last 4 years to be their voice in Hartford and represent the 34th District. I spent my whole life in this district. I grew up here in East Haven, and I started my family in East Haven. About 10 years ago, my wife and my 2 children that are here tonight moved to North Haven. I'd just like to say just a quick thank you to my wife and 2 children and my family that allow me the time to do this. It takes a lot of time, and I know you guys make sacrifices, and I greatly appreciate that. I grew up in a working-class Democratic family. Both of my parents, who are here today, worked for municipalities. In fact, my father retired after 37 years from the North Haven Board of Education just recently. For a good majority of those 37 years, he had the honor and privilege of being his union president. And I saw firsthand growing up how important it was to have somebody to advocate for people who didn't have a voice. And that's exactly what I do. I listen and I advocate. I come up with solutions, applying common sense, and solve those types of problems. All too often, we see the majority party not listening to the issues. And that's a problem. I am a Republican senator, but I'm more honored in the fact that I've been endorsed by the Independent Party all 3 times I ran for office. That shows I am about the people and policy, not party. And I hope that you will continue to support me in November so I can continue the work that needs to be done in Hartford. Thank you.
And now your 2-minute opening statement, candidate Mandato.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Brandy, born and raised in Greater New Haven, the granddaughter and great-granddaughter of Irish and Italian immigrants, born into a working-class blue-collar family. I am the oldest of 8 incredible human beings, my brothers and sisters, and a mom of 2 wonderful children that I'm raising here in North Haven with my husband. My very first job was at the old Maria's Pizza in the Nick's Char Pit Plaza. I studied criminal justice at the University of New Haven, was certified as an EMT, and then took the lessons I learned from my family and growing up in this area to understand that access to economic mobility and high quality education meant everything. And so I've committed my life to working with groups, people, cities, states, and at the federal level to making sure we all have more good choices. I currently work for a National Center for Justice and Economic Advancement, where I focus on some of the biggest challenges facing our country today. My work has been recognized by the Obama administration. During the recession, I developed programming that got all kinds of folks back to work. across the country, and that program was scaled. I lived and worked in New York City for a while at the City University of New York, the largest institution in the country. 1 out of every 75 students is a CUNY student. And there I really got to test different models and learn at scale in one of the most competitive environments what drives economic mobility and opportunity. And I would be honored to come home and do that work here in Hartford.
Okay, we will now move on to the questions portion of the program. And we will start with question number 1. Housing is an increasing challenge in Connecticut and nationwide as well. What specifically would you pursue at the state level to promote more diverse and affordable housing in Connecticut? Candidate Bedell, your 2-minute response.
All right. Yeah, there's certainly a shortage of housing throughout Connecticut, especially affordable housing. We all know how expensive housing is, and what I find unfortunate is that most of the incentives for developers are to build bigger and bigger houses for higher prices. I think we need to have incentives so that developers can build more affordable housing and more compact housing. I think that transit-oriented development is very important. We should have housing near public transit so people don't have to drive long distances every time they go out of their house. We need walkable downtowns, places where a bicycle or a pedestrian can run short errands instead of always driving automobiles, and where people can make a smaller footprint on the land. We can leave and protect open space throughout Connecticut while having denser clusters of housing. In my neighborhood, there's a closed nursing home, which there's a plan to turn it into apartments, which on the one hand, I realize there will be some more traffic in my neighborhood, but it will be smaller housing units, apartments, and I think ultimately this will be better than sprawling out into more of the open areas. So we need incentives, we need denser housing and affordable housing. And I think the government has a role in regulating this kind of development. We need to overcome some of the zoning laws that say you can't build denser housing in some neighborhoods. We need to re-examine all of those zoning districts and figure out where can we put more people as more people require housing. Thank you.
Okay. Candidate Ciccarella, your 2-minute response.
So we see housing is definitely a concern. With the shortage of housing, we need to address that. My time on the Housing Committee as the ranking member enlightened me to some of the challenges that some of our builders have, which is the root cause, part of the root cause of the cost of living. I've talked to numerous builders who tell me 20 years ago they would buy a piece of land and they would be able to develop it within 6 months, if not sooner. And now we see challenges that are put upon these builders that cost them money. And that increases the cost of doing business, and it goes to the end user. So we've proposed ways to get through that red tape and support our builders. You know, also Ion Housing, we've came up with creative solutions and put forward legislation to promote transit related housing, building and repurposing old buildings that aren't being used, and be creative and find ways to save money and build more affordably. I'm also a member of the Future Caucus, and that's something that they really pushed, trying to find ways to make sure we could have the affordable housing, not only for our seniors, but we have so many talented students coming from some of the great schools we have here in Connecticut, and they leave. So the Future Caucus came up with some ideas, and one of which is repurposing old buildings, and we see it works. In East Haven, they repurposed an old high school, and there's affordable housing where seniors could live. And those are the type of examples of things that we need to continue to do. We started that, but we have to continue to find creative ways, affordable ways to solve the problems that we have in front of us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now Candidate Mandato, your 2-minute response.
We have to stop politicizing housing. And considering candidate Ciccarella owns several houses in the district, I'm surprised he doesn't have more practical advice for folks that are looking to purchase their first and only home. There are two ways that I think the state can immediately step in and provide some guidance here. One, over the last decade, we have seen rampant use of large-scale global investment firms buying up real estate, buying up open houses and then turning those into rentals, or driving up the price and inflating it artificially. There is absolutely a role the state can play there to stop that from happening. There isn't a reason that, I can think of examples in my family alone, hardworking 2-income couples can't afford to buy their first home because we know that an outside investment firm has scooped up all of the inventory. So that is one of the first things that I would do in the Senate. Another is when we talk about housing, when we talk about expanding housing stock, which we must do, both to ensure that students and highly skilled folks stay here, that our parents have space to retire, and so that families can live in our community, we have to talk about infrastructure. We have to talk about the impact this has on parking and schools and the grocery store, because that really matters to people. And we have to put forth a plan that makes sense. I've spent much of my career working with folks that are homeless. Housing solves homelessness. Housing creates communities. We've got to be strategic and intentional about it. Thank you.
Okay. It is now time for the 1-minute rebuttal. We will go back to Candidate Bedell, your 1-minute rebuttal.
Right. Yeah, we do need to support local investors and stop land speculation. One proposal which has been used in Pennsylvania is to change the property tax structure. They call it a land tax, which puts, right now you pay property tax on your acreage and on your buildings, your development. In some places, they use a single tax on the property and not on the, single tax on the land and not on the building, or a lesser tax rate on the building. And what this does, it stops land speculators from buying up a lot of land because they know this empty space is going to cost them more in taxes. All right. And it encourages people, if they have an empty building, they're paying taxes and higher taxes for the building, and they need to develop it.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Ciccarella, your 1-minute rebuttal.
So all too often, we see the solution is more regulation or punishing one population. I've seen this firsthand in my time on housing. There are bad actors in every profession and every area, and there are people that buy up housing and take advantage of their tenants. We see that. But a lot of the property owners that I've talked to that came to me with their issues, that own investment properties, tell me about the burdens that get placed on them, and I've seen that firsthand. We need to find a way to address the problem without attacking property owners. The bottom line is it's more expensive for them to operate these apartments and houses, whether it's taxes, whether it's insurance, and just the maintenance. Not all landlords are bad. And all of the legislation that came out of housing was against homeowners. That's not balanced. We need to meet in the middle and work together.
Thank you. Candidate Mandato, your 1-minute rebuttal.
We've seen this proposed at the federal level, and I think we can also do this in our state. More opportunities for first-time homeowners, more incentives for first-time homeowners, particularly for working families. As a first-time homeowner, the only reason I was able to afford my home was because I worked for an employer that contributed to my 401k, and I could borrow against that for a down payment. And then we got a HUD loan, and then we ended up paying $400 a month in PMI. We were paying less than when we were renting, but still had that enormous weight, which is not something that everyone can carry. It's not realistic. And so we need to do better by people in our community and working families.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to question number 2. Columbine, Parkland, Uvalde, Sandy Hook, and more recently, Winder Georgia. These names and many more haunt us. With each school tragedy, our hearts are broken. We don't ask if it will ever happen again. We wonder when and where. What can be done to enhance school security in our municipal school districts? And what youth mental health policies could assist with this solution? We will start with candidate Ciccarella, your 2-minute response.
So when I hear you say that, just like any other parent, you get a chill up your back. I have 2 children, they're here today, and I share the same fears. But what we see on TV that happens all too often is terrible. And our kids go to school to learn, to have fun, to be safe. And here in North Haven, we've put forward resources so our schools could have school resource officers. I think that is extremely important to make sure we have security in these schools. Recently, there was a grant that was for nonprofits, places of worship, and also Board of Educations. And I was just recently working with our North Haven Board of Education and Police Department, trying to find ways to utilize those funds so we could make sure when our kids go to school, they're safe. And just providing an armed officer there and some security measures like a dead man door or bulletproof glass doesn't give me enough comfort either. We have an issue. We have an issue with mental health. We see the rise in it, and COVID only made it worse. And we've supported legislation to provide resources for mental health, behavioral reimbursement rates when children are getting certain services. I think it was 5001, and that was 2 years ago. Unfortunately, that wasn't funded this year. Mental health is a problem. It's a contributing factor to what we see going on. And we also see so much gun violence every single day in our cities. And we need to address that as well. Just because it's just one shooting outside of a school, it might not make the news, but we hear it all the time. And I hope we'll get the opportunity to talk more about gun violence as the debate goes on.
Thank you. Candidate Mandato, your 2-minute response.
I hate talking about this. I wish we didn't ever have to talk about this. I had children post Sandy Hook. I have a 4 and a 5-year-old. Every single time I put my daughter on the bus, I feel like I'm taking a risk. It shouldn't be this way. We see gun ownership in other countries that is significantly higher than it is in the US. We see the same mental health crisis in other countries, and we only see this in the United States. It's an issue of guns, it's an issue of culture. We have torn each other apart to such a degree that people don't feel safe, they don't trust their neighbor. This is not a simple fix, and it's one that requires investment and culture change. One that requires not only supportive, trauma-informed support and mental health services, which were included in the ARPA bill for schools that you voted against, but it also includes community building. It also includes conversations. We can prevent this from happening. We've got to want it. We don't have to live this way. We don't have to die this way. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Bedell, your 2-minute response.
Sure. Connecticut has some of the strongest gun control regulations in the country, so there's not a lot more that the legislature can do in terms of actual gun regulation. That's going to require other states or national legislation. But what we can do is support mental health. My colleague mentioned school resource officers. You know, it may be necessary to have these police officers in schools, but I think more important is we should have mental health outreach counselors in the schools who can identify problems before they start up, to identify students, children who are feeling lonely, outcast, ostracized, and are going through mental health struggles. And they need the support because that's where the problem arises. You don't want to wait until a kid brings a gun to school and then the police have to shoot them in the hallway. We really need more mental health outreach. And not only for the homicides or school shootings, but suicides. There are more gun killings now, I believe, for suicide than by homicide. And that's where, it's not gun control that's going to do it, except parents can keep their guns locked up as is required in Connecticut. What we really need is the outreach to people who are going through depression and suicidal thoughts. I'll add one thing. Can the legislature do more in terms of gun regulation? Well, there may be some technical fixes, like gun locks that require the owner's fingerprint in order to pull the trigger. That technology exists. There are things like that that can keep guns from getting into the wrong hands, because we know children get a hold of their parents' guns. Thieves steal guns from law-abiding gun owners. Thank you.
Thank you. And it is time for the 1-minute rebuttal. We start with candidate Ciccarella. Your 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we see right here in North Haven that we had incidents where the school had to go on lockdown because of a perceived threat. And I just want to recognize and thank our law enforcement and our Board of Education for finding ways to work with the federal government and be able to monitor social media. Some of those threats came from a mental health person, a mental health patient who was a veteran who sent that to their therapist, and they were able to quickly get officers there to make sure our students were safe. But as Mr. Bedell stated, we have the strongest gun laws. We need to make sure we're addressing the individuals that don't follow those laws. A majority of the gun violence happens with illegal guns and illegal gun owners. That needs to be addressed, and we had an opportunity to do this session, and unfortunately we fell short.
Okay, thank you. And candidate Mandato, your 1-minute rebuttal.
So we did have an opportunity this session. There was legislation that said the average person couldn't buy more than 36 handguns in a year. Candidate Ciccarella voted against that. We know that when someone is buying 36 guns a year, more often than not, those guns are going to be illegally sold and used to commit crime. I would like that to stop happening. I also agree that we have some of the strongest common sense gun legislation in the country, and I've often heard our schools described as easy targets or hard targets. I don't want our kids in our schools described as targets. We have to do better, and we have to do better in this modern environment. We had bomb threats all the time when I was a kid. We would play in the parking lot when it happened because people weren't regularly blowing up schools. That is not our reality today. We have to do better.
Thank you. And candidate Bedell, your 1-minute rebuttal.
I'll pass on the rebuttal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to question 3. The cost of electricity has been a major issue the past few months, with skyrocketing bills for homes and businesses. What is your explanation for the drastic increases? What can be done to reduce the cost of electricity in our state? And what does the public benefit charge cover? We will start with candidate Mandato. Your 2-minute response.
Great. So let's start with the public benefits charge. 75% of that was a corporate bailout for Millstone. We recognize that had we not bailed Millstone out, we would have lost 30% of our power, something around there. My question is, why did the legislator decide that when we were bailing out a company that made $2 billion in profit last year, that bill would go to the taxpayers instead of back to that company when they had the revenue? Why do we continue to create legislation that hurts people in our communities and hurts working families? The public benefit charge, the 25%, was due to the moratorium that was in place during COVID. So federal legislation and federal programming was still in place so that people living in poverty still had access to that programming. They could still keep their power on, leveraging those federal dollars. What this covered were small businesses that were shuttering, were organizations that couldn't keep the lights on. I don't disagree that we shouldn't have covered that. But again, last year, UI, their parent company, billions of dollars in benefits, billions of dollars in profit. Why aren't they paying this bill? Why do we continue to pick up the slack there? Why is a private company providing a public service off the hook and not taking the risk when we, the public, when our dollar is already not going far enough, have to pick up the slack? My electric bill was $925 in August, right when we had to go buy clothes for school, when we had to, my daughter's 4th birthday. These things hit families, and it is incredibly detrimental. This is not something we can just roll with. We deserve better.
Okay. Candidate Bedell, your 2-minute response.
Well, first a disclaimer. I am very fortunate to live in Wallingford, which has the cheapest electricity in the state. Our town had the wisdom 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, to set up a municipal electric utility. And it's run by a commission. It's who are answerable to the townspeople, to the residents. Unlike the big electric companies whose first responsibility is to make profits for their shareholders. And we can see how that structure has turned out. I think it's difficult at this time to start a new municipal utility, but the state could change some regulations, some legislation to make municipal utilities feasible in other towns where they look on the model of those handful of towns that have it. I pay usually less than $50 a month for my electricity, believe it or not. The other thing is we need initiatives for conservation. And if we had access to retrofitting homes with better insulation, if we had more subsidies for distributed power, where you don't have to rely on an electric utility delivering power from far away, but you could generate your own through solar, wind, geothermal, all right, then you could have a cheaper bill. And I agree that the public benefit was largely a bailout for Millstone, and we should not have Connecticut so reliant on nuclear power. It is not carbon neutral. It has a lot of dangers in the mining of uranium and the transport, and although they can be run safely, there's still the problem of the nuclear waste.
Thank you. And now, Candidate Chigarella, your 2-minute response.
Thank you. This is clearly a huge concern to a majority of the people that I talk to. And this is something that my colleagues and I were talking about for the last 2 years and proposed legislation to address this. This narrative that the Millstone deal created this high cost in our utilities, and that's just false. Policies by the majority party that was determined by three people within PURA and Underdeep created a way that we have to procure energy. And the other ways of procuring energy that would make it more affordable, like natural gas, and creating other clean sources of energy that we proposed, one of which could have been hydrogen, and that isn't considered a clean form of energy. And it does have a low carbon emission, and there are more technology and advancements coming out with that, but that's not allowed. And if we were not able to utilize that millstone, we wouldn't have enough power. That's 40% of our power. And I am all for clean energy and finding ways to reduce the cost. But if we don't address it at its root cause and find ways to get more clean, affordable energy in, the solution proposed was wind. We're buying nuclear at 5 cents a kilowatt. If we brought on the wind deal that the governor, because we explained the concerns, held off on the wind deal, that would have been at 16 to 18 cents a kilowatt. We need to make sure when we're creating legislation, it doesn't cost the taxpayers more money.
Thank you. And now for the rebuttal period, Candidate Madonna, your 1-minute rebuttal.
Why are we responsible for putting money into the shareholders' pockets? Why are we responsible for covering their bill due? That is my question. My great uncle was a coal miner. I know this because we did Ancestry this year, and we saw black lung as the cause of death for several family members. So we're going to be smart about energy. We're going to be intentional about how we use it, and we are going to put working families first and ensure that any legislation we put forward prioritizes their well-being and their sustainability. Thank you.
Okay. And now, Candidate Bedell, your 1-minute rebuttal.
Fortunately, we have moved largely away from coal, but not entirely nationally. The United Kingdom just shut down its last coal-burning plant, and that's where the Industrial Revolution began. They have a plan to shut down natural gas plants as well. And in the last 10, 15 years, Connecticut has moved much more toward natural gas. Right, it's just cleaner than coal or petroleum oil, but it still is not clean. So we really need to find cleaner solutions because we are in a climate crisis. Look at the recent flooding we had in Connecticut, a hailstorm that took out farms in Wallingford and North Branford. We need to address this and address this soon. It's not something we can keep kicking down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Candidate Ciccarella, your 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. 1 minute or 2 minutes is simply not enough to discuss the root cause of this problem and find a way to address it. Again, there were numerous ideas proposed by the Republican Party, and you could look those ideas up. We at the legislature have to make tough decisions, and that's what we should do and be held accountable for them. But under the Malloy administration, they took that decision away from the legislator and put it under Deep and Pura, and these are the policies that came out of that. The utility company is guaranteed a percentage of profit, regardless. And the more money they spend, whether it's to put in EV charging stations or make sure the grid could support additional charging stations all around, as if the EV mandate went through, all of that cost goes back to the end user, and they're guaranteed their profit.
Okay, thank you. We're moving on now to question 4. Our cities and towns need increased sources of tax revenue to help meet the rising cost of local government services. What can be done to bring more economic development into our state? And how do we compete with our neighboring states to attract large development projects? We will start with Candidate Bedell, your 2-minute response.
All right, well, you said to attract large developments or large industries. I think Connecticut has been giving too much thought to the large businesses, trying to attract the large businesses to move here from other states. And it's really been a race to the bottom with giving them tax breaks. We need to develop our homegrown economy, and there are more jobs created from small businesses. We need to make it easier for small businesses who have complained to me about the jumping through hoops and paperwork and red tape. We need to simplify those regulations so that new business startups can get opened sooner. They can get their business off the ground. Another thing that would help new enterprises would be a state public bank. Right now, we're taking our state revenues and pension funds, we're investing them in Wall Street. We should be investing them in state, in Connecticut. If we had a state public bank like North Dakota has, we could offer small business loans, we could offer student loans, we could offer more affordable mortgages. This would not be taking over from the private banks. Basically, the state public bank works with local banks and credit unions. And if we had that, it would support businesses, new enterprises here in Connecticut. Thank you.
Okay. And now, candidate Ciccarella, your 2-minute response.
So this is something that I have had a lot of time to do research on. Prior to me running for office, I started a small business, and I joined a national association, and I was able to meet with individuals from other states that do the same type of work. And when we had conversations to talk about the cost of doing business here in Connecticut compared to what other states paid, they were mind blown at our license fees and all of the regulations and cost to do business in Connecticut. We need to be friendly to business. And we've seen over the last couple of sessions, the policies that come out of the Labor Committee are just the opposite. They are literally crippling small businesses. We've seen policies where a contractor pays the subcontractor. Subcontractor doesn't pay the employee. The solution is to have the contractor pay again. Those type of policies are not friendly to small business. And also, they're hurting our end user, because if that contractor has to pay twice, that cost is going to go on to the end user. Just like the utility companies guaranteed a percentage of profit, a company has to operate and make money. And if we're not friendly to small business, they're not going to stay here. They're going to go somewhere where it's easier to do business and more cost effective. We talk about bringing tax dollars back to our town. What we need to do is stop having unfunded mandates from the state put on the town, because at the end of the day, those unfunded mandates cost the taxpayers more money. Thank you.
Okay. Candidate Mandato, your 2-minute response.
Thank you. This is going to be tough to do in 2 minutes. I've spent 20 years in economic and workforce development, and have found that you can be business friendly and worker first at every turn. And that is why I've been sought after as a partner to some of the largest corporations in the country, and have led efforts with small and medium businesses, including with national chambers of commerce, local chambers of commerce. Earlier this year, I worked with the Federal Small Business Association to update a rule that removed red tape and removed barriers to access for additional funds. What we need in Hartford is someone that understands how to take advantage of those programs and bring them to small businesses in Connecticut. This is what I have been doing for my entire career. We have 90,000 unfilled jobs here in Connecticut. So businesses here, we have to make sure that we're creating the right talent pipeline to meet that need. And a strong workforce system is how we do that. And when we're driving up revenue by bringing in new business, supporting our small businesses so they thrive, it goes back into the workforce system. We develop a robust talent pool and a talent pipeline so the brilliant minds that are trained and educated here in Connecticut stay here and continue to be part of our labor force. Thank you.
Okay. Now to candidate Bedell for your 1-minute rebuttal.
Colleagues have mentioned the unfunded mandates the state puts us on town government, and the tax burdens that are put on the residents of each town. So I'm really not a fan of our current system of taxation that depends so much on property taxes. Connecticut has 169 municipalities, and we see they each have their different mill rates, which lead to different challenges in urban areas, in suburbs, in small rural towns. The state should take up the burden of funding a lot of these mandates, including more funding for the schools instead of towns competing against each other. There's also a competition between towns to draw a business here. Well, let's take a business out of North Haven and move it to Wallingford, or out of Wallingford, move it to East Haven. That's not productive. It's not helpful. We need more funding to the towns from the state.
Thank you. Candidate Ciccarella, your 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. I think it's important when addressing an issue, specifically with our labor force and being friendly to small business, the place to start is in the middle and work with both sides to come up with solutions so we can make sure we're supporting our businesses and make sure employees are taken care of. But out of the Labor Committee, every single piece of legislation was anti-business. In fact, there was legislation just proposed, it was the tip wages. No one wanted that bill. The employees didn't want it, the employers didn't want it, and the patrons didn't want it. But the Democratic Party still pushed that agenda, and I don't know why. I do believe that we have to work from the middle and come up with common sense solutions to address the problems we have, and continuing to punish people or businesses is not the solution. At the end of the day, that's going to trickle down and affect the employees because there won't be jobs here. And second, the end user that has to pay for the service.
Okay. And now, candidate Mandato, your 1-minute rebuttal.
I'm really looking forward to working with the Labor Committee on solutions that I've deployed in other places that address exactly this issue. Really looking forward to come up with solutions that empower workers and support businesses, that allow us all to thrive, that make Connecticut competitive in growing sectors, in our traditional sectors. I think there's so much to do there. Additionally, when it comes to the cost-sharing model with our schools, I agree. The model is flawed, and all 4 out of 5 towns in District 34 were deeply underfunded for years. A bill came up this year to address that and to increase funding to 4 of those 5 towns by 10%. Again, candidate Ciccarella voted against that.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to question number 5. Every year, when cities and towns plan their next budget, we hear 2 recurring themes. First, the rising cost of transporting garbage out of state. And secondly, the need for some state funding for more, and secondly, the need for more state funding for education. What are your solutions for addressing these 2 local challenges? We will start with candidate Ciccarella, your 2-minute response.
Thank you. That's a perfect question. One of the candidates up here said that I didn't vote for a piece of legislation to bring money back to education. Unfortunately, a title of the bill doesn't mean what the bill does. It's about the actual details within the piece of legislation. And we need to pay attention to that. All too often, the title of the bill sounds great, but it doesn't do anything remotely close to the title of the bill. So when we talk about supporting our Board of Educations and bringing funding here, I was able to bring back millions of dollars to our district. And also, the majority party didn't put forward a budget. The Republicans put forward a budget, and we wanted to fully fund special education and double fund ECS. But that did not happen. So we really have to find a way, better yet, we have to listen to everybody that's in that room. We're outnumbered 2-1 up there. And we see the Republican Party put forward ideas and pieces of legislation that make sense. But unfortunately, the Democratic Party doesn't listen. We have proposed numerous budgets and ideas that fall flat, and we don't get the opportunity to be in the room and be able to make these types of decisions. We are outnumbered not only in the House, we're outnumbered in the Senate. When we put forward pieces of legislation, they have to come out of committee. We're outnumbered in the committee as well. So all of these ideas that we're talking about, we put forward, myself included, legislation, proposals that came with research from stakeholders on both sides of the issue, and the majority party fails to put those ideas forward. And my record speaks for itself. And I encourage everyone to take a look at my voting record. I vote for policy and not on party line.
Thank you. Candidate Mandato, your 2-minute response.
Thank you. Yeah, the content of the bill was what I was talking about, and not the title of the bill. It had nothing to do with not agreeing to fund education. This question is tricky in that it again puts up garbage with education. Funding our public education is one of the most critical things we can do as a society. So we have to rethink this model. We have to ensure that we are providing equitable funding and support for students. Special education was also included in that bill. I want us to be working with educators and with our leaders to come up with a better formula for this. A solid education that serves a public education that serves all of our students should not be optional. Bake sales should not be the cornerstone of our education funding. We have to do better. And I hear really loud and clearly that Republicans are ineffective in Hartford. So why would we send candidate Ciccarella back up there and pay him to do another job he's not going to do? Thank you.
Okay. Moving to candidate Bedell, your 2-minute response.
Yeah, I'll address the first part of the question about garbage. And my colleague said garbage and putting garbage and education together may seem strange, but I think it's very logical. Many of you who have children probably know that children are the best educated about recycling and about the problems that garbage generates. All right, they're often the police officer in the house making sure that everything goes in the blue bin or wherever you're recycling. So we got a revised bottle bill last year, which, yes, it was long overdue because 5 cents for a bottle, you can't collect bottles and buy yourself a lunch anymore. So it was raised to 10 cents a bottle. Okay, great. But 10 years from now, that's not going to pay for a lunch. So we need a really mega bottle bill that covers a lot of recycled products, not just certain beverage bottles. And that increases the deposit with the cost of living. The cost for towns is not only the collection of garbage, but yes, the disposal, because we don't want to incinerate in Connecticut locally, and we've filled out most of the landfills. And so the towns have to pay to ship it far away to another state or even another country, to China for, I think they send their electronics parts to China for recycling. We need to do a really overhaul of what we consider trash and what's reusable or recyclable. We just need a big public education campaign about reduce, reuse, recycle, and we need it at the collection centers. We need to make it very easy to recycle as many products as possible. And go to the other end for the packaging. I see all this over-packaged products, which you buy in the store, and you get a huge box or delivered by Amazon, and there's one little product in it like this, and most of it's styrofoam packaging. That's got to stop, and there may be a role for legislation in this, regulation of what kind of materials can be used for packaging.
Thank you. And now to candidate Ciccarella for your 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you, and I'm not insulting the question, but we all made comments that it was pretty interesting to have garbage and education in the same question. It's kind of what we see at the Capitol. We have numerous pieces of legislation that have nothing to do with each other in one vote, and that's something that really frustrates me. Because it's not about Democrat, it's not about Republican, it's about the people. It's about what's better for the people, and being able to make a decision based upon one piece of legislation and one topic is so important. But all too often, we see just the opposite. There are a bunch of different topics all in one bill, and you have to vote for it or not vote for it. And there was a piece of legislation regarding youth suicide prevention. 13 sections, I supported all except one. One was taking away the parental right to know if your child was getting treatment. So I voted no. And they said, well, how can you vote against youth suicide prevention? But I personally believe that the parent is, thank you.
Okay. And now to candidate Mandato for your 1-minute rebuttal.
I was part of the reduce, reuse, recycle generation. We had events in school where I felt like I was going to save the world by doing that, and then I became an adult and find out that systemically large corporations in an hour are going to harm the environment more than me not recycling ever will. Personal responsibility is still critically important, and we've got to hold folks accountable. Let's have a real conversation about what the real issue is. In Hartford, I am loyal to the people of Connecticut. I'm not loyal to a party. And if a bill doesn't look how I want it to look, I'm going to change it. Thank you.
And to candidate Bedell for your 1-minute rebuttal.
I'll pass on this rebuttal.
Okay. Well, we are at the sixth and final question. Question 6. Most people agree we must do a better job protecting our planet and the environment. The effects of global warming are well accepted in the scientific community. What state legislation would you support to help make Connecticut a more environmentally friendly, healthy, and resilient place to live, work, and play? And we will start with Candidate Mandato, your 2-minute response.
Thank you. I've talked about my policy priorities broadly, and I've also talked about how there are certain themes that have to be found throughout any policy that we make in Hartford. Climate justice is one of those themes. Mental health is also one of those themes, given the crisis that we're currently experiencing. And so I think in any legislation that we create, there has to be a consideration for its ecological impact. There's no planet, there's no jobs. There's no planet, there's no business. We have to make sure that we're protecting our planet. Additionally, I think there's advocacy and work we can do locally to protect agriculture in the state. So I spent a lot of time over the last month or so learning about the agricultural laws in Connecticut and where the gaps are. I think many of you have heard of William Della Camera at this point, who rode his tractor down to DC to advocate for a more robust farm bill that's specific to Connecticut's needs. I learned all about special crops. I learned that things just work differently here, and we have to make sure that we have a voice from Connecticut that is directly impacting what that legislation looks like, and that we have a straight line to resources and support for these farmers. I was really proud to hear that he feels like he's making some progress in the conversations he was having. We were at a fundraiser at Mill Pond the other night, and you can see the power behind that. If we want food, we need farms. We need a farm bill that effectively serves our community. Thank you.
Okay, and we will now go to Candidate Bedell for a 2-minute response.
Okay. So I hope everybody realizes what a climate crisis we and the planet are in, whether it's wildfires out west or hurricanes and superstorms in the southeast. We had terrible floods in Vermont, and then we had terrible floods here in Connecticut. And then the hailstorm that devastated William Della Camera's farm, as well as 3 vineyards in Wallingford and North Branford. Through the summer, I get all my produce from Mr. Della Camera's farm in Northford, and I had a conversation with him the other day where he told me about his trip dealing with the state and the national government, and he told me that the Connecticut Department of Agriculture is really not helping very much. They kind of throw up their hands and say, oh, well, we can't do anything because we have to follow the directives of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So there's really more that can be done. He said that the State Department of Agriculture needs to be more proactive and looking at insurance for farmers when terrible things happen. Also, local agriculture is what we need in Connecticut. We need to protect our farms here, and so that people can buy food locally. It's healthier than shipping it from California or from other countries, from Mexico. And then we need to address the energy. I've mentioned some other energy issues, but we need to rapidly develop clean energy, and if that requires government subsidies, so be it. There's a lot of talk about electric cars, which I guess are part of the solution, especially in a town like Wallingford, where we have cheap electricity. But in general, what we need is better public transit. We need better mass and minor transportation. We need. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now, Candidate Ciccarella, your 2-minute response.
Thank you. Anyone who turns on the TV and sees what's going on, whether it was the valley with that flooding, or we talked about the farms destroyed in a once-in-a-100-year hailstorm, we realize there's a problem. And we have to find a way to solve that problem without doing unintended consequences that negatively affect the constituents. and could affect their pocketbook. As a Republican, I have one of the highest environmental ratings. I firmly believe that we need to leave this place better than we found it. One of the reasons why I decided to run for office is because of my kids and your kids and their grandkids, and make sure we make Connecticut more affordable and safe. But we also need to keep in mind we're a small state. And as we're trying to solve some of these issues, we need to make sure all of the states around us, all of the states, are doing the same thing, and we're moving in the right direction together. You know, we're breathing the air from the west, and our air goes out to the water. And if we're going to make these type of mandates, like the EV mandate, and again, I'm not against EV. My kid wants to get me to get a Tesla. I think they're great. I'd love to get one. But that would be my choice. We cannot mandate people to get certain cars. Not only are they expensive, but we need to charge them. And the cost it would take to build out the grid, to even support all of the charging that would have to happen, would be millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and the utility company said that. That cost would go to the end user. So while trying to solve this serious problem we have, we cannot hurt our constituents anymore. We're overtaxed, our utility rates are high, we need to make Connecticut more affordable, and we need to try to solve the problem without creating another one. Thank you.
Okay.
And we can't solve that by building more lanes on the highways. We need to upgrade Metro North Railroad and CT Rail. We need high-speed rail like they have in other countries. We need, during the pandemic, we had buses that did not charge any fares, and that ended after the pandemic. That should be renewed. We should have free buses running all the time on a schedule that will encourage people to use them. I see a lot of empty buses because, it comes maybe once an hour, once a half hour. You know, we need buses that are very convenient to use and trains that are convenient to use. So really we need investment such as that into public transit that will cost less for people to use than keeping up an individual automobile.
Okay. And now, Candidate Ciccarella, your 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. We talked about the environment. We talked about ways to address that. But something we didn't get an opportunity to talk about is something that I worked really, really hard, so much time, not just my opinions about workforce development, but the stakeholders, the educators, the businesses. In Wallingford, which has great electric rates, also had a great program for a pipeline. And I talked to Sal Menzo, he's been long retired now from Wallingford, but he created a workforce development pipeline. Very simply put, he went to the businesses, he understood their needs, he went to the school and got the kids that maybe didn't want to go to college and got them the training they need so they come out of high school with meaningful jobs. I've taken that logic, that idea, and that research and put forward numerous bills that would promote workforce development, and we were able to pass legislation to make sure all the students that are graduating from high school, they have financial literacy. You'll be surprised how many kids don't even know if they have to pay their cell phone bill.
Okay. Well, that concludes the question portion of our program. We will now move on to the next segment, which is candidate closing statements, which will be 2 minutes. We will start with Candidate Ciccarella, your 2-minute closing statement.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank you for putting this on. I know that you put a lot of work into this. You know, as I said, I grew up in the 34th district, but just growing up here and knowing the people doesn't make me the most qualified candidate. I have my life experiences and my record over the last 4 years of being a state senator. And what that shows is I am not about party. I'm about the people and the policy. Unfortunately, and I don't want to make this about Democrat, Republican. I already said I was endorsed by the Independent Party, says my father's a Democrat. I really hate when it has to be about Democrat and Republican. But what is frustrating, one of the candidates said were not effective, the Republican Party. The problem is it's 2-1, and the majority does whatever they want. And when we have a piece of legislation and we try to run an amendment to fix it and it makes sense, go look at the voting record. Every single time the Democratic Party votes down the line. I've talked to so many of my colleagues that are on the other side of the aisle that I'm friends with. And I'm agreeing with them on a bill, and we go and have the vote, and they vote the other way. That blows my mind. I'm not making it up. Go look at the tallies. That's what kills me about what we're doing here. We're trying to do what's good for the people. That's what I've been doing. That's what I want to continue to do. I want to make sure we continue to bring money back to the district, our taxpayer dollars. I want to make sure we continue to push legislation we got across the board that advocate for our children, making sure they're safe online, making sure they have the resources they need to be ready for the next steps in life, safeguarding our seniors so my parents and yours don't have to move somewhere else because they can't afford to live here. And most importantly, we need to support our first responders to make sure they have the tools and resources they need to keep you guys safe and hold individuals accountable. And I hope I could count on your support to continue to be your voice in Hartford. Thank you.
And now to candidate Mandato for your 2-minute closing statement.
A quick point of clarification. I didn't say the Republicans were ineffective. Candidate Ciccarella did. So often a question that gets asked of me is, why do you have to make everything political? This room is filled with friends, family, my husband. Almost all of them have asked that. I just saw my brother John roll his eyes at me. And it's because whether we like it or not, policy is in our business all day, every day. Whether you're paying attention to politics, whether you care about politics, policy impacts almost every single thing we do. We need people fighting for working people. I am a subject matter expert in workforce and economic development. I am someone who has dedicated their lives to fighting for working people and making sure we all have what we need to meet our greatest potential. I am someone that has been a steward of public funds my entire career, and I am someone that will fight for what's right, regardless of whether a particular party agrees with it or not. I am open to disagreeing. I am open to conversation, and I promise you at the end of the day, I'm going to fight for you regardless. I hope I have earned your vote tonight, and if you have more questions for me, I would love to talk to you more. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to League of Women Voters, and thank you to Sally for moderating.
Okay, next we will go to candidate Bedell for your 2-minute closing statement.
All right. Well, I sympathize with Mr. Ciccarella because being in a minority party in Hartford, but I hope that you'll send me to Hartford to be in a real minority party because I'll be an independent voice, and I know I will have to work with my colleagues in the Republican and the Democratic Party. Right? Now, I see a lot of people out there wearing T-shirts or buttons supporting my colleagues. So I'm going to assume that anyone who's not wearing a button or a T-shirt came out to support me. Thank you. All right? And I hope you'll consider voting for me. All right. So I'd like to take the rest of my time to talk about the Green Party, which you may not be very familiar with. I am a member of the Connecticut Green Party, which is part of the National Green Party, which is also part of an international network of Green Parties, which started in Europe and have now spread around the globe. And however you vote here for this race, the state Senate race, I'd like to say that you should take a look at the Green Party's candidates for president and U.S. Senate. Because of the electoral college system, you probably know Connecticut is not really in play in the presidential race. We kind of already know that Connecticut's electoral votes are going to go to the Democrats because they're the majority here. But you don't see the candidates coming here to campaign. They're out in those 7 swing states like Pennsylvania or Michigan. So a vote for the Green Party is really a vote for peace. Our candidate Jill Stein for president and Justin Paglino for U.S. Senate are running on a peace platform, whereas the Democrats and Republicans are mostly just giving a carte blanche to Israel in Palestine, Our candidates are calling for a ceasefire now and an end to the genocide there. Tomorrow night is Rosh Hashanah. I will be praying for peace around the world.
Thank you. So that concludes the closing statement portion of the program. We're now going to do a statement of interest. This is something that I included in the program. I thought it would be a good idea to give the three candidates an opportunity to tell the folks, without any reference to politics or policy, what you like to do. Let the voting public out there learn a little bit about you. So we will start with candidate Mandato, your 1-minute statement of interests.
I have a 4 and a 5-year-old. I have no interests. I am an older first-time mom. I had my kids at 38 and 39. Both of them came to us through IVF, and they are the greatest joy of my life. I love being a parent. I feel like I'm the luckiest human being in the planet that every morning I get to wake up and see their beautiful faces. Before that, I used to travel, and I used to swim, and I used to hike, and I love baseball. I've been to many stadiums across the country. My plan is to get to all of them. And I love spending time with my family. We host family pizza night every Friday at my house. It's an open door to anyone, all of our friends, the community, and those are the things that make me the happiest. I love being with the people that I love, and it is why I fight as hard as I do. Thank you.
Now to candidate Bedell, your 1-minute statement of interests.
Okay, I used to say that I was a bicyclist, and unfortunately as I get older I've been cycling less. However, I still do a lot of hiking. I'm on the board of the Wallingford Land Trust and also on the Quinnipiac River Linear Trail Committee, and we help to maintain trails for outdoor recreation. So I really love hiking. I've hiked from New Haven to Hartford on the Blue Trail system. I also enjoy gardening. I've been planting trees in my yard. I think I have over 30 species of trees. I call it an arboretum. And I also garden with plants for pollinators. I like to support the bees and butterflies and hummingbirds that come to my yard. Other than that, I spend time with my cats. They're good for my mental health. And I'll point out that the hiking and bicycling, these outdoor enjoyment of nature, is very good for people's not only physical health, but mental health. It's been demonstrated.
Okay. And now to candidate Ciccarella, your 1-minute statement of interests.
So I also have 2 children, and it feels like our job outside of work is carting them around to soccer and sports. My wife and I really enjoy that. We like to spend time together as a family, along with my parents. I like to garden. I grow fig trees. They're not really working out, so I might have to call you after, Dave. You might have to help me out. We also do a lot of different things as a family. We make homemade wine and keep up our traditions and heritage in many ways. And really, it's the time with the family that is really important to me.
Okay. Well, it is now time for me to give some closing remarks. If you can all just hang in there, please. I, first of all, want to thank the candidates for participating in this debate. I've been where you're sitting. I know how hard it is. I want to thank the audience, and a special thank you to those who submitted questions. They were all great questions, making it difficult for the questions committee, which is why we ended up with one question with 2 different aspects to it, because we couldn't decide. We were trying to get as many of the questions in as possible. I would like to thank the League of Women Voters Questions Committee, and especially Alice Baxter and Diane Hoffman for their help. I want to thank the North Haven Library Director, Sue Griffiths, and the Library Events Coordinator, Brittany Pearson, for their cooperation with organizing the debate. And I also want to thank Walt Mann and his crew at NHTV. I think NHTV performs a great service in this town, as all community television does. It enables people to know what's going on in their town government, their community, and I applaud Walt and his crew for that. Finally, I want to thank Scott Howland, the timer, and Nancy Barrett, the card holder, for making this debate run smoothly. The League of Women Voters is a national organization and was formed in 1920. It's a nonpartisan organization dedicated to voter rights, voter registration, and voter access to the polls. The League of Women Voters of Hamden, North Haven is open to men and women. We could use more North Haven members. We are quite outnumbered by our friends from Hamden. We have many programs throughout the year, such as voter registration drives, the annual breakfast with legislators, and we attend naturalization ceremonies and give out info on how to register to vote. The annual dues are reasonable, and you can put in as much time into this as your schedule allows. If you are interested in joining the Hamden North Haven League of Women Voters, you may call the office at 203-288-7996, or you could email me at sbuemi5@comcast.net, and I will point you in the right direction. If you believe that an informed voter is critical to our democracy, please consider joining the League of Women Voters of Hamden North Haven. One more thing, don't forget to vote. Thank you, and good night.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.